The galaxy had learned to whisper. Under the Empire, even engines sounded muffled, as if starships were ashamed of their own noise. Cities kept their lights low. Worlds that once argued in the open now traded rumors in back rooms. The Senate still existed on paper, a chandelier left hanging in a burned house, glittering while the ceiling collapsed. People said the Jedi were a myth that had finally died of embarrassment. People said the Force was fading, like an old hymn no one remembered the words to. People said Padmé Amidala was dead, a name on a memorial, a story told with a sigh, a candle stub in a shrine on Naboo, left to melt and go cold. But on a forgotten industrial world in the Outer Rim, where the air tasted like scorched metal and rain carried the grit of old battles, a woman with tired eyes and a medic's hands stitched refugees back together. Here, she answered to a different name. Here she kept her hair plain, her clothes unremarkable, her voice careful. She walked through districts built from welded scrap and repurposed Clone Wars hull plates, where families slept under tarps stamped with old Republic logos nobody dared display openly anymore. She treated crush injuries from strip mine accidents, burns from faulty heaters, infections that spread in crowded shelters, grief that didn't have a cure. And she raised two children who were told they were nobody special. Luke was all elbows and motion, a boy who ran as if the ground might vanish behind him. He collected broken parts the way other kids collected stories. He tried to fix everything: droids, generators, arguments, people. Leia was smaller, steadier, a girl who watched first and spoke second, and when she spoke, even adults tended to listen. She learned to read faces the way Padme read wounds. She learned when to soothe and when to push. She learned that silence could be a weapon and a shield. They were twins, born to a war widow, the refugees said with sympathetic nods. Born to a woman who'd lost someone important, the kind of loss the Empire approved of. Tidy, private, non-threatening. Padme never corrected them. She never spoke the children's true surname. She never spoke of Naboo. She never spoke of Coruscant, except in her nightmares, where it glittered beneath her like a jeweled blade. Most of all, she never spoke the name of their father, not because she hated him, because the name carried gravity, because it would pull the Empire's gaze like a star pulling drifting debris, because she had seen what Palpatine did to anything he wanted, because she had once watched Anakin Skywalker become a stranger inside his own skin, and because the Force was not quiet in their children. It started as little things, small enough to dismiss if you were desperate to dismiss them. Luke would get angry, and the lights would flicker. He would slam a fist on a workbench, and the whole stack of scavenged components would jump, as if jolted by unseen static. Once, when a gang kid shoved him into a pile of scrap and laughed, the kid's blaster, an illegal little holdout he shouldn't have had, came apart in his hands like it had decided to surrender. Leia spoke and machines listened. A lock that had been jammed for days clicked open when she told it, sharply, to stop being stupid. A battered medical droid that had refused to boot suddenly chirped to life after she leaned close and whispered to it like it was frightened. When she was scared, alarms misfired and doors hesitated, as if the world itself wasn't sure whether to protect her or betray her. Padme saw it all, and each time, terror rose in her like bile, because she knew what they were, because she knew what the Empire did to what they were. Rumors moved through refugee districts the way disease did, fast, invisible, unstoppable. gifted children taken in night raids, whole families erased for hiding them, public examples made in market squares, a boy executed for lifting a fallen ration crate without touching it, his mother screaming until a trooper's stun baton taught her to be quiet. Padme treated the bruises afterward. She washed blood from stone. She held shaking hands in hers and lied, softly, that the galaxy still had laws. Then, one morning, a familiar kind of cold settled behind her eyes, the kind of cold she remembered from a chancellor's smile. The Imperial intelligence officer arrived as a silhouette first, an outline against the pale sky, coat too clean for this district, boots that had never known mud. He came with 2 stormtroopers who didn't look around like tourists, didn't flinch at the smell, didn't show curiosity. They simply cataloged. He asked questions that seemed harmless if you didn't know how empires hunted. Names, birth records, old medical supply logs, a file that had once lived on Naboo, and now, somehow, had echoes in a backwater clinic's inventory list. An outdated entry referencing a shipment authorized by a Amidala as a Senate liaison, a relic mistake from the Clone Wars era. Padme kept her expression blank. She kept her breathing shallow. She smiled the way she had learned to smile in political rooms full of knives. The officer studied her anyway, as if he could smell history. That same night, far away in a palace that fed on fear, Palpatine felt something brush the edge of his awareness. Not a Jedi presence, clean and defiant. Something younger, wilder. 2 sparks moving together like twin stars trying to be born. He had thought that line had ended. He had watched Padmé's life flicker out on a medical report and smiled at the neatness of it. He had broken Anakin's heart and forged it into a weapon. And yet, a flicker, a question. He turned his face toward the darkness like a predator scenting blood in water, and issued orders that traveled through channels no Senate ever saw. Find surviving Amidala loyalists. Find the anomaly. Bring me what is mine. The industrial world began to tighten like a fist. Stormtrooper patrols increased. Curfews arrived with new brutality. Strip mines expanded, chewing through settlements and displacing families who had already been displaced. Refugee camps swelled until people slept standing. Anyone who resisted was made into a lesson. Padme kept her head down until the day the Empire executed a child in her district. They did it in the open, in the plaza, where people once traded food and spare parts. They made everyone watch. A hooded kid, small, wrists bound, trembling so hard the chains rattled. The Inquisitor who stood beside the troopers did not wear armor like a soldier. He wore confidence like a cloak, and his eyes looked through the crowd as if searching for a face he'd seen in a dream. The child cried. The mother begged. The crowd held its breath. And when the blaster fired, something in the air seemed to tear. Padme felt it like a thread snapping in her chest. She tasted metal. She saw Luke's hands curl into fists, his eyes bright with rage. She felt Leia's gaze sharpen into something older than her years, something that wanted to stand on a rooftop and scream truth into the sky. Padme grabbed them both and dragged them home before the world could notice the way the air leaned toward them. That night, after they slept, she sat in the dark and admitted what she had refused to admit for too long. Hiding was no longer protection. Hiding was a countdown. The message came through an old channel she hadn't used since she'd been someone important. A fragment of code embedded in a medical supply manifest, like a secret pressed into paperwork. A former contact. A voice she recognized even after all these years, softened by loss, but still stubborn. Not Bail Organa. He was too visible, too hunted, too far away now. But someone who had worked for him once. Someone who still believed in the idea of a republic, even if the republic was dust. There's a network, the message said. Early resistance cells, smugglers and idealists and broken soldiers who can't stop fighting. They're moving gifted children off-world, quietly, not safe, but safer than staying. If you're alive, Padme, if you have them, move. Padme didn't cry. She packed. She gathered ration bars, med kits, forged ident papers, credits hidden in the lining of a coat. She wrapped Luke's favorite broken hydrospanner in cloth, like it was a sacred object. She made Leia leave behind the little notebook where she'd been writing names of people she wanted to help someday. Because paper could be evidence. When the twins woke, Padme told them only what they needed. They were leaving. They were not going back. They were to obey, even when they were scared, even when they were angry, even when Luke wanted to argue and Leia wanted to negotiate. They slipped into the city before dawn, into streets that looked like rusted canyons. Behind them, their clinic sat quiet, a small beacon they could no longer afford to light. The chase began without ceremony. A patrol stopped them at a checkpoint. Luke held his breath too loudly. Leia stared at the trooper as if daring him to find a reason. Padme offered papers with hands that didn't shake, and for a moment it seemed like it might work. Until a comm crackled in the trooper's helmet. An order, a description, a hint of urgency that didn't belong in routine. Padme moved first. They ran. They plunged into collapsing urban districts where Clone Wars scaffolding still hung like skeleton ribs. They cut through abandoned clone facilities, full of echoing corridors, and sealed doors that remembered different masters. They crossed desert scrapyards where old walkers lay half-buried like extinct beasts, their armor peeled open for salvage. Imperial forces closed in like weather. Luke, reckless with compassion, stopped to help a man pinned under a fallen beam. Padme hissed for him to move, but Luke's eyes flashed and the beam rose, just enough, without his hands touching it. The man stared in horror and gratitude, and fled. Luke looked shocked at himself. Leia, already learning leadership the way some people learned breathing, guided terrified refugees into alleys and service tunnels, barking orders with a certainty that made strangers obey. When a door refused to open, she put her palm on the cold metal and spoke through clenched teeth. The lock clicked as if embarrassed. Padme watched both miracles and felt her heart crack wider. An inquisitor hunted them. Not the one from the execution, though perhaps they were connected. This one moved through the city like a shadow with a blade, sensing the twins like heat through walls. He didn't know who they were. He only knew they were bright. He only knew the Emperor wanted bright things extinguished or owned. Padme kept asking herself the same question, over and over, until it became prayer and curse. Do I keep them hidden and safe? Or do I let them become symbols? In the refugee port city, where ships came and went under Imperial inspection, the questions stopped being theoretical. They were cornered at the docks, pinned between shipping containers and the open, exposed landing pads. Sirens wailed, blaster fire stitched the air. Civilians scattered like birds. The Inquisitor stepped into view, cloak snapping in the wind, his lightsaber igniting with a hiss that made the crowd recoil. Stormtroopers formed a line behind him, rifles raised, faceless and absolute. Padme pulled Luke and Leia behind her, even though she knew her body could not stop blaster bolts. "Stay down," she whispered. "Please." But Luke heard a child crying, and something in him broke. He stepped forward. The world seemed to inhale. He raised his hands without understanding the gesture, without training, without permission. The next volley of blaster fire struck an invisible barrier and scattered like rain hitting a shield. Refugees froze, staring at the impossible. Leia climbed onto a crate, eyes wide, voice cutting through panic like a knife through rope. "Move," she shouted. "To the left, under the gantry, now." People moved because her voice made them believe moving mattered. For a moment, everything stopped. Stormtroopers hesitated. Even the Inquisitor faltered, sensing not just power but something else. Something that didn't feel like fear. Something that didn't feel like domination. Hope. Padme's throat tightened. She saw it spread across faces like sunrise, fragile and unstoppable. And she understood. The Empire wasn't terrified of the Force. It was terrified of what the Force could make people remember. That they were not born to kneel. She made her choice. In the chaos, while Luke held the shield and Leia directed the living, Padme slipped into a relay station at the edge of the port, an old holonet node used for shipping manifests and propaganda bursts. She slammed the door, locked it, and went to work with hands that had once signed laws. She hijacked the relay. Her face appeared on screens across the district first, then across the world, then, briefly, across the galaxy. She didn't dress like a senator. She looked like what she was, a woman who had been hunted and had refused to die. "My name is Padme," she said, voice steady even as the station shook with distant impacts. "I was told to disappear. I was told to be silent. I was told the future belonged to the Empire." She took a breath. "I have children," she continued. "Not weapons, not secrets to be owned. Children." She didn't name Darth Vader. She didn't accuse the Emperor. She spoke instead of the Republic, of what it had been meant to be before it was hollowed out. She spoke of dignity, of neighbors, of the right to live without permission. She spoke of hope as if it were a real thing, not a story. Outside, the Inquisitor screamed orders. Inside, Padme kept talking until troopers breached the door, and the signal began to die. Across the galaxy, screens flickered, voices cut out. But it was too late. Somewhere in a mining camp, a worker looked up and felt something inside them stir. Somewhere in a garrison, a stormtrooper hesitated for a heartbeat longer than training allowed. Somewhere in the hidden corners of oppressed systems, resistance cells replayed the fragment again and again, polishing it like a stolen gem. Padme ran. She found Luke and Leia at the edge of the docks, exhausted, terrified, alive. A freighter's ramp yawned open like salvation. A smuggler waved them on, cursing and laughing like someone who'd forgotten how to be afraid. They boarded under fire. The ship lurched upward, engines roaring. As the world fell away beneath them, Padme held her children close and finally told them the truth she had tried to bury. "You are not nobody," she whispered into their hair. "You were never meant to survive. And you did." The freighter punched into hyperspace. In the silence between stars, far away, Darth Vader stood alone in his fortress, surrounded by cold machinery and lava light. He had felt the broadcast like a blade sliding under armor. Padme, the twins, his children. The realization didn't soften him. It didn't redeem him. It didn't erase the ashes in his lungs. But it did something more dangerous. It gave him a secret. Palpatine reached for him through the Force, hungry for answers, hungry for control. Vader bowed his head as if in obedience, and said nothing. He let them escape. He did not tell the Emperor. In the dark, hope moved like a quiet ship slipping past a blockade, small, fragile, and suddenly impossible to ignore.